In this lecture, we're going to address the historical development and some of the key events in history that serve to establish the foundations that govern the conduct of ethical research. And although the issues related to ethical research date back well before 1947, current practice was heavily influenced by what's called the Nuremberg Code. And this was a code that was developed specifically for post-World War II tribunals that put various members of the Nazi government on trial for genocide and crimes against humanity. And this established the basic principles in terms from a research perspective on what is considered to be ethical and moral. And the first provision that came out of the Nuremberg Code is that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. And some of the atrocities and a very clear, detailed account of the experiments that were conducted by scientists within the Nazi government are captured in this book written by Robert J. Lifton titled The Nazi Doctors. And in this particular book, Mr. Lifton applied the basic core elements of research ethics when interviewing various doctors in the Nazi government and the experiments they conducted. Ironically, he applied those principles towards the protection of his interviewees who were guilty of not doing the same for prisoners in various concentration camps and patients in hospitals throughout Germany prior to and during World War II. Some of the other major provisions that served as the foundation for the current conduct of ethical research includes the capacity to consent. The person that is going to serve as a participant in the study must be able to make a voluntary decision, and doing so, they must be free from coercion. And so there must be no positive or negative inducements for participants to enroll in a study. An example of a positive or negative inducement is passing or failing a course. So a professor that tells their students that, well, you can pass my course if you come into my lab as a research subject or a participant. And if you don't, you run the risk of failing a course. That is a clear violation of the Nuremberg Code, as well as a violation of policies at every university in the country. The participant must also comprehend the risks and benefits for participating. And because participating in almost every single research study carries some risk to it, also may impart some benefits, the participant must provide informed consent. So the researchers cannot be deceptive in the possible risks that a participant may experience in their in enrolling in a study. So researchers cannot be deceptive in the treatments that the participants will be subjected to. However, blinding and masking is allowed. This is quite different. So in a blinding or masking type of experimental approach, the participant may not or will not know if they're receiving the treatment or a placebo. However, before enrolling in the study, the participant must be made very aware that they may receive a treatment or they may receive a placebo situation or condition that will look like and mimic the treatment. The investigator must also be competent in what they are studying. And so previous experience or expertise on the part of the investigator, an examination of credentials must be part of the process in terms of approving research for a particular team. Following the Nuremberg Code, The Declaration of Helsinki, which was first established in 1964 and revised a little bit later in 1989, laid out further clarifications on research protocols. One of the key elements here is that the emphasis of an independent committee that has no vested interest with the project must approve a study from being started. And this began the development of what's called the Institutional Review Board. In Canada, these boards are referred to as Research Ethics Board, but the Institutional Review Board came right out of the Declaration of Helsinki, and many scientific journals, many research journals, will still make reference to the Declaration of Helsinki, and authors of submitted works must include a statement that their research abided by all of those provisions. In 1978, the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research was convened in a room referred to as the Belmont Room at the Smithsonian Institute. And the committee issued what's called the Belmont Report. And the Belmont Report established basic ethical principles in research in the United States, and most of those, if not all of those provisions, have been adopted in Canada. And the key element for the Belmont Report, the first key provision, is respect for persons. And this relates to the provision of sufficient information to potential research participants so that informed decisions can be made. Participants cannot be entered into a research study unless they provide voluntary consent, but it is the researcher's responsibility to ensure that the potential participant actually understands the information before they provide voluntary consent. And respecting persons is just simply not treating people as inanimate objects, and potential research participants do not have any, or researchers don't have any entitlement to having anyone, participant or person, entering their study. And individuals are autonomous in that they must be capable of making deliberate, informed decisions about their participation in research. A potential research participant that cannot provide that consent cannot be entered into a research study. In terms of informed consent, some of the key elements here include information. And so the informed consent, which is provided in writing, must inform the participants that there are risks and potential benefits from engaging in the research study as a subject. And this involves explaining the details of the study procedures and/or treatments that may be applied. The participant must comprehend the basic elements of the study, and it is the researcher's responsibility that the participant understands the study and understands the procedures. Now, the research participant, it is not necessary for the research participant to understand the study to the same depth as the people studying that question. However, in terms of what the participant will be doing, why the study is being done, and all the risks and benefits must be explained in a manner understandable to the potential lay audience. The consent must be free from coercion, so it must be voluntary in the truest sense of the word, and so the voluntary consent must be provided in writing, and it must be informed. The environment must be conducive for voluntary consent, and to ensure that environment, confidentiality has to be ensured and maintained. So the research team is obligated to not share any information about any one research participant to anybody outside of the research team. And so work supervisors, faculty advisors, other individuals within the organization that are not part of the directly part of the research team cannot be present when that voluntary consent is provided. And the participant must be free to withdraw from the study at any time without penalty. And so the researchers may still be able to use some of the data that are collected, but the research participant is under no obligation to continue participating beyond the point that they don't wish to. The term assent refers to the agreement to participate in a study specifically for children or adults with limited cognitive ability. And so in this situation, children and adults with limited cognitive ability must agree to participate in the study and should not be and cannot be coerced by their parent or guardian. So the parent or guardian must provide permission. The child must agree to participate, but the child or the adult with limited cognitive ability, in the case of a guardian, cannot be pushed into participating in a study. The second element of the Belmont Report refers to beneficence and non-malfeasance, and this involves a cost-benefit analysis in conducting the study. And so the participant must be in a position where they can assess the risks and benefits for participating. So the benefits must definitely outweigh the risks, and if a research team is at the point where they are interviewing participants to enroll in a study, that study will have been approved by the Research Ethics Board, and the stamp of approval must be provided on all documentation that research participants will read. And when we talk about risk refers to any physical, psychological, or social harm that is beyond the expected daily experience. And so not all levels of risk are the same, but nevertheless, as long as there is risk involved, even if it's very minor risk, that must be disclosed to the participant. There are situations where the participant may receive benefits from participating, and so how the participant or society overall will benefit must be detailed in the informed consent document. However, those benefits are not guaranteed. One such example is that participants may gain more information about their IQ or their fitness levels that will inform the participant individually on those matters. However, that cannot be guaranteed. In terms of beneficence, this is a term that refers to the purpose of benefiting others. And this is a foundation of why research is conducted. Non-malfeasance refers to researchers doing no harm. And this aims to reduce the risks to participants. It's understandable that research studies do involve risks, but it is the researcher's responsibility to ensure that those risks are reduced, as well as laying out a plan on the management of any adverse event that may take place during the conduct of that research for each individual. In terms of the loss of confidentiality, this is always a concern in research studies, as it poses a risk to individuals to public scrutiny. And so the research participant is certainly free to discuss their participation in the study. However, the researchers are bound to not discuss the outcome of their study related and that would identify any individual. Anonymity cannot always be achieved, but the researcher should aim to not link any outcome of the study to the identity of an individual response. And these are all of the key elements under this second provision of the Belmont Report. The third provision refers to justice, and that refers to the benefits and burdens of research that are distributed fairly, and that relates to the opportunity for people to serve as participants in a research study. And that deals with fairness when deciding who can enter a study and who is not enrolled in a study. Now, in terms of individuals, participants cannot be selected due to any favor or disdain. And in terms of risky research, there are a very clear set of what are called inclusion and exclusion criteria that must be approved by the Research Ethics Board so that the selection of and the entry of participants in a study is conducted fairly. And that deals with the appropriateness of the proposed methods. In this image we see on the slide is a specific reference to the Tuskegee syphilis study. Tuskegee is a city in Alabama. And this was a study conducted by the United States Public Health Unit. So a government organization carried out the study between 1932 and 1972 with the overall objective of observing the progression of untreated syphilis. The participants in this study included approximately 400 African American men who could not read and therefore could not provide that informed consent. And the participants in this study were never informed that they had the disease. In fact, the presence of syphilis were confirmed through autopsies. And although the researchers knew that the participants had syphilis, they were denied treatment during a time and afterwards in which penicillin was discovered and developed and used as a standard and effective treatment for syphilis. The three videos here are not very long, but I'll ask you to go through these three videos that will discuss the Tuskegee study in a little bit greater detail. Some of the details are quite disturbing in terms of the images and the experiments that were actually conducted. The second two videos, which are continuations of part 1.4, addresses some of the key policies that govern ethical research in Canada, and these are fairly short videos. Finally, in terms of the ethical treatment of data, and these refer to the numbers, the scores, the information that are collected from research participants after the fact. And so if a study is conducted ethically in terms of risks and benefits and informed consent, non-ethical activities can still take place. And that includes falsification and fabrication of data. The study that linked the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine and the development of autism gained worldwide attention, but was found to include fabricated data and was subsequently retracted. And the Eric Pohlmann case, in the link in an earlier video, highlights how data were completely fabricated in an Excel sheet that led to the federal criminal conviction of Eric Pohlmann. A concept called massaging the data does actually take place, and one of the issues that should be addressed is what's called p-hacking. And this is a process where data are manipulated in order to get a statistically significant p-value. The p-value here refers to the probability of committing a type 1 error, which is statistical. And so researchers are really treading a fine line here in terms of not treating data ethically. Dropping research participants, if any participants are outliers, is always a concern in terms of the ethical treatment of data in a study. And so researchers should investigate and explain why outliers are present, and if an outlier has been removed from the data analysis, then that must be disclosed. In some situations it might be perfectly appropriate, but it must be disclosed. Reporting only statistically significant results can pose a problem, because statistically non-significant findings can be just as valuable as significant findings. And including some variables but not others must be explained as well. So why were some variables included? Why were some others not included? Are some variables truly irrelevant? Is there a large number of variables that were sampled in the study, which might be perfectly appropriate, but once again, when we go to the responsibility of conducting ethical research, which includes the ethical treatment of data, it begins with the internal responsibility of the researchers. So this ends our third part and final part of our Unit 3 lecture.